Ever had to confront someone older than you and stand your ground?
On Christmas morning, while the scent of cinnamon rolls lingered in the air and the fake pine needles from my mother's 10-year-old artificial tree clung stubbornly to the carpet, my mom handed my sister a small, gold-wrapped box and said, without even glancing in my direction, we wanted to reward her success. She said it so casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world to publicly single out one child in front of the other. No hesitation, no shame, no warmth in her voice for me, just a smug little curl of her lip when she turned to Rebecca, beaming like the sun had come out just for her. Rebecca, of course, played it down with the same practiced modesty she'd perfected since high school, when she'd get praised for bringing home AC in algebra because she was creative, not analytical, while I got grounded for an A- in chemistry because, Angela, we know you're capable of more. She opened the box, and inside was a key on a velvet cushion, like it was jewelry or a medal. And then the bomb dropped. My mother looked around the room, like a performer cueing the applause, and announced with a proud smile, "We're signing the house over to Rebecca this spring. It's part of our estate plan. She's done so well for herself, and we just want her to feel secure." I said nothing. I just sat there with a cup of lukewarm coffee in my hand, my fingers gripping it tight like it was anchoring me to the moment, the holiday, this absurd performance that had become tradition. My father shifted awkwardly in his recliner. He didn't say a word, didn't meet my eyes. Just sipped from his mug and looked out the window like he hadn't just watched his wife gut me in front of everyone. That had always been their dynamic. She did the cutting, and he looked away. I had a small box on my lap too. I had handed it to him when I arrived, but he hadn't opened it yet. And I waited, watching the smugness settle over the room like dust. Rebecca clutched the key to her chest like it meant more than it probably should, while her husband, Derek, some overconfident insurance guy with the charisma of a dead toaster, clapped her on the back like she'd just closed $1 million deal. Their 2 kids were playing on the floor, already bored with their gifts, which had cost more than I'd made in my entire first year of running my small design firm. I'd brought presents too, of course. I'm not cruel, but nothing flashy. Some hand-sewn doll clothes for my niece, a woodworking kit for my nephew, a gift card to a restaurant for my parents, because what else do you buy people who think they've already built their kingdom? Eventually, my dad reached for the box I'd given him. It was smaller than the one Rebecca got, but it was heavier, denser, and wrapped in plain brown paper. I hadn't bothered with ribbons. I didn't think it needed dressing up. He peeled off the tape with the precision of a man who hated disorder, and when he pulled out the white envelope inside and opened it, I watched the blood drain from his face like someone had punched him in the gut. 1 second, he was just an old man in a cardigan, clutching his coffee and quietly enduring the chaos of a family Christmas. The next, he was ghost pale, his lips parted slightly, eyes fixed on the paper in his hands as though it had just rewritten everything he thought he knew. My mother noticed first. She looked over, saw the expression, and stiffened. Her eyes flicked from the paper to his face, to me, and then back again. Rebecca was still laughing about something Derek had whispered in her ear, completely unaware of the shift in the room, like always. Because things didn't happen to Rebecca. Things happened for her. That was the rule. The silence dragged. The room hadn't gone quiet, it had sunk into quiet, like someone had dropped a heavy curtain across the scene. My dad didn't speak. He didn't ask me where I got it, or what it meant. He didn't even try to deny it. That was the part that hit me the hardest. Because denial would have been something. Anger, confusion, even a bad joke. But what he gave me was nothing. He folded the page slowly, hands trembling just enough that I noticed, and set it on the coffee table like it was radioactive. No one asked me what it was. Not out loud. But I saw the question burning in their eyes. And I saw something else, too, something I hadn't seen in either of my parents in years. Fear. Not of me exactly, but of what I knew. Of what I could say. Of what I had, finally, taken out of the shadows and placed squarely in the middle of our carefully constructed family theater. And you know what? I didn't say a word. I didn't explain. I didn't dramatize it. I just sipped my coffee and watched the cracks begin to form in the faces I'd been studying my whole life. Because some truths are louder when you say nothing. Some revenge is sweeter when it's quiet, when it just sits there in the air, daring them to speak first. You ever been in a room where everything looks the same, but suddenly nothing is the same? Where everyone is smiling, but the smiles don't reach their eyes anymore. That was Christmas morning in our living room. And I know what you're probably thinking. Why didn't I just confront them, scream, ask them why they loved her more, why they made me feel invisible? Because I already knew the answer. And because I didn't need words anymore. I had the page. And he knew exactly what it said. So now I have a question for you. Have you ever given someone a gift so sharp, so personal, that it cut without leaving a mark? Because that's what I gave my father. One page. One truth. And in that moment, I became more visible than I had ever been in 38 years of being their daughter. And that was only the beginning. Growing up in our house was like living backstage at a one-woman show where Rebecca was always the star and the rest of us were just there to hand her props, clap on cue, and stay out of the shot whenever the spotlight hit her face. There was never any dramatic announcement that she was the favorite, no banner, no declaration, no birthday cake that spelled it out, but everything from the way my mother combed Rebecca's hair before school to the way my father never raised his voice at her, not once, made it painfully obvious that in the private economy of our household, Rebecca was the currency of pride and I was something else entirely. Maybe obligation. Maybe filler. Maybe just the easy one, as they liked to say, the child who didn't cause any trouble, who never asked for much, which was code for the one we can ignore because she won't scream about it. The worst part wasn't the favoritism itself. That kind of thing, as awful as it is, can be endured, but the way they dressed it up as fairness, as if they were so enlightened and balanced that they could never possibly be accused of playing favorites, even while they did it right in front of me with the gall of people who think they're being subtle. My mother would gush about how challenging Rebecca was, how sensitive, how complex, like she was some rare orchid that needed extra light and warmth, while I, apparently, was a cactus, low maintenance, independent, capable of surviving on air and dust. When I got a scholarship to college, they nodded approvingly and said they were proud, but when Rebecca got into an overpriced private art school they couldn't afford, they mortgaged part of the house just to cover her first year and threw a backyard party like she'd just been named the Pope. I remember sitting on the steps with a paper plate on my knees, watching people toast to her unconventional talent, while she twirled around in a thrifted skirt she'd cut into ribbons to look expressive. I had just won a regional science award 2 weeks before, but no one brought it up. No one even asked about it. That was the rhythm of things in our house. Rebecca performed, and the rest of us were the audience, expected to clap when she cried, when she succeeded, when she failed, when she tried. And somehow I did clap. For years I clapped. Because if I stopped, I thought maybe they'd notice me in the wrong way. Or worse, not notice me at all. It was little things at first, like how Rebecca's room was redecorated 3 times before high school, with new wallpaper, a chandelier, and a vanity, while I was still sleeping under peeling glow-in-the-dark stars I stuck on my ceiling when I was 9. Or how when we both got sick, they'd hover over her with ginger tea and blankets and an actual bell to ring if she needed anything, while I was told to tough it out and not make a big deal. But over time, those little things stack up, like layers of dust on furniture no one touches anymore, until you start to believe that maybe you really are less interesting, less lovable, less worth it. Not because you are, but because you've never been shown otherwise. I think the moment that really cemented it for me, the moment I realized it wasn't just a phase or a misunderstanding or something that would even out with time, was the Christmas I turned 17. Rebecca had just moved out for college, and I had spent the last month working at a bakery after school to save up for a decent camera. I wanted to go into visual design, and I had this idea that if I could just start learning the ropes on my own, maybe I wouldn't need to beg for classes or equipment. When we opened presents that year, I unwrapped a soft, sagging envelope with a $20 bill and a generic greeting card from a pharmacy. Rebecca, who hadn't even been home in 6 months, opened hers and found a Nikon DSLR with a carrying case, extra lens, and a note that said, "We believe in your vision." I stared at her tearing up, thanking them over and over while I sat with that $20 bill in my lap, the ink from the card already smudging under my thumb. I remember looking at my dad, and he said something like, "She needs the support right now, you know how hard art school can be," and I just nodded, because what else could I do? What do you even say when your parents literally hand your dream to someone else and call it love? So I stopped asking. I stopped trying. Not out of spite, but for survival. I decided, in my quiet, calculated way, that if they weren't going to invest in me, I'd invest in myself. And that meant doing what none of them expected, not chasing their approval like some hungry puppy, but building a life without it. I worked. I failed. I worked harder. I started my own business from a corner of my apartment, using secondhand tools and watching tutorials at 3 in the morning because no one was going to hand me the shortcut. Meanwhile, Rebecca bounced between jobs like stepping stones, always exploring, always trying to find herself, while my parents framed it as courage. They never called her irresponsible or flaky or directionless, words they used freely with me whenever I deviated even slightly from their imagined version of what I should be. She lived at home rent-free for almost 2 years in her late 20s, working on a children's book she never finished, while I was putting in 14-hour days just to keep my business above water. Still, I sent birthday cards. Still, I showed up for holidays. Still, I sat across from them at that cluttered dining room table, year after year, pretending that the wound between us wasn't there, or at least that it had healed over. But it hadn't. It just got quieter. And sharper. Like a blade tucked into a sleeve, waiting for the right moment. So when my mother handed Rebecca that house key on Christmas morning, I wasn't surprised. Not really. I knew this day would come eventually. I had felt it gathering like a storm behind their polite smiles and their careful avoidance of any topic that involved my success or my life beyond what I volunteered. And I could have said something then. I could have stood up, thrown a glass, screamed about fairness or the years I had swallowed my own pride just to keep the peace, but I didn't. Because I had something they didn't know I had. Something I had been holding for 2 full years. Something that could unravel all of it if I timed it right. And I had timed it perfectly. Because when you're the forgotten child, the one they underestimate, the one they cast in shadow, you learn to operate in the dark. You learn to watch, to remember, and to wait. And I had waited long enough. There's a strange kind of power in being overlooked for so long that people start assuming you're incapable of surprise, as if quiet were the same thing as weak, as if stillness meant stagnation rather than observation. And while they were so busy rewarding my sister's mediocrity with applause and generosity she barely noticed, I was silently collecting the moments they forgot I was even in the room, every dismissive glance and every forced smile, stacking them one by one like matches small, insignificant on their own, but together, just waiting for the right friction to light the whole damn structure on fire. And I knew, deep down, that someday I'd strike the match, not out of cruelty or bitterness exactly, but out of necessity, out of the simple truth that you can only carry silence for so long before it becomes something heavier, something dangerous, something that demands release. The turning point didn't come in the form of some dramatic breakdown or a tear-soaked confrontation. It came quietly, almost stupidly, over mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. It was one of those evenings that dragged on like wet wool, with my father carving the turkey like it owed him money and my mother offering passive-aggressive compliments about the stuffing I had made, which, according to her, could have used just a little more sage. But still, very brave of you to try something new. Rebecca had brought Derek again, and he spent most of the evening explaining cryptocurrency to my uncle like he'd invented it, while my aunt tried to steer the conversation back to anything resembling reality. I wasn't even planning to stay long. I had driven in from the city just that morning and already had a mental countdown ticking in the back of my head from the moment I walked through the door. And then my father said something small, forgettable to anyone else, but it landed differently for me. We were talking about family history, old stories, the kind people retell every year like traditions themselves, and someone brought up Grandpa Joe, my dad's father, who had served in the Navy and had the kind of jawline you only see in black and white photographs from the 50s. I made a comment, something like, "I always thought it was weird that Rebecca doesn't look like any of them," and my dad stiffened. Not visibly, not in a way anyone else would catch, but I saw it. His hand froze slightly on the serving spoon, and he didn't respond right away. When he finally did, he said, "Jeans are funny," and forced a laugh that didn't quite touch his eyes. Now, that might not sound like much, and to anyone else, it would have slid right under the radar, but I know my father. I know the way he holds his breath when he's hiding something, the way he can't look directly at you when he's cornered, and in that moment, something clicked. A memory surfaced years back. I'd overheard my parents fighting late at night, their voices low and angry, and while I couldn't make out every word, one phrase had stayed lodged in my brain ever since. "You promised it wouldn't matter." At the time, I had no idea what it meant, but now, paired with that look on his face and the awkward silence that followed my comment about Rebecca, it all started to form a shape. A question. A possibility I'd never allowed myself to fully consider. I didn't act right away. That's not how I operate. I let it sit. I let it stew. And over the following weeks, I started pulling on threads, not out of malice, but out of the kind of curiosity that comes when something just doesn't feel right anymore. I ordered a DNA test for myself, not expecting anything dramatic, just wanting to know, and when the results came back, everything I thought I understood about our family cracked like cheap porcelain under pressure. Because there it was, in black and white, my father and I shared a paternal line. Strong match. No ambiguity. But the match to Rebecca missing. Not just weak. Absent. At first, I told myself it could have been a lab error, some glitch in the system, but the numbers were too clear, too definitive, and once the suspicion had taken hold, there was no going back. I started digging. I remembered that my mom kept old paperwork in a cedar trunk at the foot of their bed, mostly forgotten beneath quilts and Christmas ornaments. One weekend when they were out of town, I visited under the guise of house-sitting, and I opened that trunk with shaking hands. Inside, among faded report cards and hospital bills, I found what I hadn't even known I was looking for. A manila envelope with Rebecca's name in my mother's handwriting and a stack of documents that confirmed what the DNA test had already whispered to me. Rebecca wasn't my father's daughter. There had been an affair long buried, never spoken of, the kind of secret people carry like a stone in their shoe, pretending the limp isn't there. The dates lined up too perfectly to ignore, and tucked in the back was a single page from a paternity clinic, signed and stamped, showing that my father had known, or at least suspected, from the very beginning. And he had chosen silence. Chosen complicity. Chosen, somehow, to love the child who wasn't his more than the one who was. I remember sitting on their bed, that paper in my hands, my heart pounding like a drum in an empty auditorium, and feeling not just anger, but clarity. Suddenly, everything made sense. The favoritism, the distance, the careful way he navigated her emotions like he was trying not to trigger a minefield, it had all been guilt. And me? I had been a constant reminder of the truth he couldn't face, of the lie he had built his life around. I was the truth they had buried, the proof of everything he had ignored in the name of keeping things peaceful. But peace built on a lie isn't peace at all. It's quiet chaos. And I had lived in it long enough. So I took the document. I made a copy and locked the original back in its place, undisturbed. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Because I wasn't ready to burn the house down, I wanted to wait until the crowd had gathered. I wanted them all to be watching when the first spark hit the fuse. That's the thing people forget about revenge. It's not about rage or even justice. Not really. It's about control. Timing. Making sure the truth lands exactly when it will do the most damage. And Christmas, with its wrapping paper and brittle smiles and forced proximity, was the perfect stage. They'd handed Rebecca the key to the house, thinking they were rewarding her, thinking they were tying a bow on years of denial, thinking they were being generous. But what they didn't know, what they never imagined in all their confident self-righteousness, was that I held the master key. Not to the house. To the truth. There's something strangely sacred about the moment right before a secret is revealed, the way the air feels heavier, like it's holding its breath with you. The way time slows just enough to let you look around and absorb every detail of the setting where your world is about to shift, even if the others in the room are still laughing, still talking, still pretending everything is as it's always been, blissfully unaware that the truth is already here, sitting right in front of them, dressed in plain wrapping and waiting to be unwrapped like a ticking gift. And as I sat there on that overly firm couch in the living room I once called mine, legs crossed, eyes forward, coffee untouched on the coaster beside me, I watched my father's fingers tremble slightly as he unfolded the paper I had placed so deliberately in his hands, and I felt a strange calm wash over me, not satisfaction exactly, not yet, but a stillness I hadn't known in years. The kind of silence that comes not from giving up, but from finally letting go. The room had been so loud just moments before, filled with Rebecca's laughter and Derek's smug chuckling, my mother's performative warmth radiating off her in waves as she offered cookies and complimented herself on the cranberry glaze, while my father, as always, faded into the background, holding his mug like a prop and playing the part of agreeable patriarch. But the moment that envelope tore open, the shift was instant and unmistakable. His face, usually unreadable in its bland, aging neutrality, drained of color so rapidly that even Derek stopped mid-sentence and glanced over, brow furrowed, unsure whether he was witnessing a medical emergency or something more intimate, something more dangerous. I had given him no warning, no note, no indication of what would be inside that carefully folded sheet of paper, and yet, I could see in the way his eyes scanned the words that he understood immediately. There was no confusion, no attempt to interpret or downplay what he saw, just recognition, raw and unfiltered, followed by a long, unbroken silence that grew so loud it seemed to press against the walls. My mother, who'd been cutting a slice of cake for Rebecca, froze with the knife halfway down, her jaw tightening in a way that told me she had probably feared this day for years, but had allowed herself to believe it would never actually come. Rebecca, still oblivious, was adjusting the gold key on her necklace chain like a teenage girl flaunting her first car, her mind clearly miles away from whatever silent war was now unfolding across the coffee table. She was basking in her moment, the successful daughter, the heir to the house, the chosen one being rewarded for the vague, undefined victories my parents had always pretended to see in her, her confidence, her creativity, her resilience. All those meaningless words they used to justify what they gave her that they never gave me. And it wasn't until she caught the look on our father's face, the pale horror mixed with resignation, that the smile began to falter. I watched it happen like a scene in slow motion, the confusion spreading across her face, the uncertainty, the creeping awareness that something was wrong, that the energy in the room had shifted and the center of attention was no longer her. She looked at my father first, then at my mother, and finally at me, with a puzzled frown that bordered on annoyance. "What is that?" she asked, her voice not fearful yet, just impatient, like someone demanding to be let in on a joke they weren't included in. My father didn't respond. He didn't look at her. He just held the page in both hands like it was made of glass and would shatter if he moved too fast. My mother set the knife down and walked over slowly, eyes locked on him, and when she finally reached his side and saw the document, my copy of the paternity test, the one confirming that Rebecca was not his biological daughter, her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no sound came out. For the first time in my life, I saw her speechless. Not wounded, not angry, not controlling the scene, but stunned, naked in her silence, with nothing prepared, no script, no story to shield her. And it was in that moment, in that small, collapsing stillness, that I finally spoke, not with rage, not with accusation, but with the precise, calculated tone of someone who had already made peace with the fallout. "It's a DNA test," I said plainly, my voice steady, not loud, just enough to be heard over the sound of everyone's thoughts racing. "I had mine done a while ago. I matched with Dad, strong match. No surprises there. But then I wondered why Rebecca didn't. So I checked." Rebecca stared at me like I'd just slapped her across the face, a mix of disbelief and offense blooming in her expression as she scoffed. "You tested me without asking?" Her voice cracked slightly at the end, the first real sign of panic slipping through the cracks of her polished composure. "No," I said, not breaking eye contact with our father, whose hands were now resting in his lap, the paper still unfolded, still visible. I tested myself. Then I found the paperwork in Mom's trunk, hidden under old tax forms and baby teeth. The one that confirmed what you both have known for a long, long time. My mother tried to speak then, some fragmented version of a denial or maybe an apology, but my father stopped her with a quiet, measured voice I hadn't heard in years. "Don't," he said. "Just one word. Heavy final." And somehow, that one word did more to shake Rebecca than anything I had revealed, because she knew in that moment, that this wasn't something new to him, that he wasn't shocked by the truth, but by the fact that it had surfaced, that it had finally, irrevocably, been dragged into the light in front of the entire family. "I didn't mean for you to find it like this," my mother whispered, and I let her have that sentence, let her believe for a second that she still had any control over how this played out. Because the truth was, I had planned every step of this. I had chosen Christmas morning not out of spite, but because it was the one time I knew they'd all be together, all dressed in their roles, all expecting peace and praise and performative warmth. I had handed him the truth in the middle of their favorite tradition, not to destroy it, but to reveal what had already been rotting underneath it for years. Rebecca stood slowly, the key now limp in her fingers, no longer glowing with significance, and she looked at me not with hatred, but with something worse, confusion. She couldn't understand why I'd done this, why I'd waited, why I'd chosen this day, and it hit me then. She had never really seen me. Not once. Not in 38 years. I had been the background noise to her lead performance, the afterthought, the safe one, the good daughter who never rocked the boat. And now, in one single moment, I had capsized it. "I just wanted the truth to matter," I said quietly, more to myself than to any of them. For once. No one replied. No one moved. And the paper sat there, still open, still screaming silently into the space between us, as the wreckage began to settle, and the real weight of what had been done, not just by me, but by all of them, started to bloom in the silence. There's a moment, right after the truth has detonated, when everything hangs suspended in a kind of stunned quiet, as if the very air has forgotten how to move. As if all the sound in the world has been drawn inward into the hollow space between people who can no longer pretend they're the same as they were 10 minutes ago. That's where we were, standing in the scorched emotional aftermath of a truth so long buried, so carefully concealed, that the light of day seemed to peel the skin from it, and in that moment, I realized that the only thing more powerful than telling the truth is watching people squirm under the weight of it, especially when they've spent decades believing they'd successfully outrun the reckoning. No one spoke. My father had sunk into the armchair like the life had been sucked out of him, his hands still resting limply on his knees, his posture slumped in a way that told me more about his inner collapse than any words ever could. My mother stood behind him, her arms crossed, not defensively, but like she was physically trying to hold herself together, as though the force of her own unraveling might knock her down if she let it fully register. Rebecca, still gripping the house key that now meant nothing, no longer had the smug self-assurance she'd carried into the room. Instead, she looked like a woman who had been spun around too fast, her eyes searching for an exit from a conversation she couldn't comprehend, let alone control. And I stood perfectly still in the middle of it all, not gloating, not even smiling, because what I felt wasn't triumph. It was clarity. It was a quiet, anchoring kind of satisfaction, the kind that comes when you finally know you weren't crazy, when every gut instinct you ever doubted is confirmed, when the ghosts that haunted your childhood are finally given names and faces and receipts. I didn't need anyone to admit guilt or apologize or fall to their knees in remorse. I just needed them to see it, to sit in it, to feel the discomfort of the truth as I had felt the discomfort of their lies for years. Rebecca was the first to break the silence, and of course, she turned it inward, as she always had, like the world was something that happened to her. "So what? What does this even mean now?" she asked, her voice tight, somewhere between defensive and wounded. "You think this changes anything? He's still the man who raised me." I nodded slowly, meeting her eyes, and I didn't argue, because she wasn't wrong. He had raised her. He had chosen her. Every Christmas, every graduation, every whispered conversation I was never invited to, that was still real. But what she didn't understand, what she couldn't understand, was that it had never been about biology for me. It had been about knowing. About understanding why things were the way they were. Why my accomplishments were met with polite nods while hers were framed and hung on the walls. Why I always felt like I was auditioning in a show where the role had already been cast. It wasn't that she wasn't his daughter. It was that I was, and they had never treated me like it. My mother finally spoke then, her voice cracked and low, like she was pushing every word uphill. It was complicated. You don't know what it was like back then. She paused, waiting for some grace I wasn't willing to give. I didn't plan for it to happen that way. And when we found out, your father, he didn't want to break up the family. We agreed it would be better if we just moved on. I laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, just in that incredulous, exhausted way you laugh when something is so absurd it bends the laws of reality. Better for who? I asked, knowing the answer but wanting her to say it out loud, to finally own it. You think this was peace? You think raising two daughters in the same house, while punishing one for the sin the other never had to carry, was some kind of mercy? She didn't respond. She looked down, her eyes glassy, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But sympathy is a tricky thing when it's been starved for years. I couldn't muster it, not now. Not after everything. Derek, surprisingly, had the good sense to stand and walk toward Rebecca, gently taking her arm like he might escort her out of the wreckage, and I could see the shift in his expression. The dawning realization that the family he'd married into was not the neat little portrait it had once seemed. I wondered if he was reevaluating all the stories he'd been told over dinners and wine, wondering how much of it had been carefully crafted illusion. Rebecca, for all her anger, didn't yell. She didn't throw the key or accuse me of ruining her life, probably because even she knew, somewhere deep down, that the lie had always been unsustainable. She turned to our parents, her voice tight. Did you ever plan to tell me? Or were you just going to leave that to rot forever? My father finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes was not shame, or guilt, or even sadness, it was emptiness. He had spent so long carrying the secret, it had hollowed him out, and now that it was gone, he looked lighter, yes, but also older. Like a man who had been walking with a backpack full of bricks and, once freed from it, couldn't quite stand up straight anymore. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said, and it was such a pathetic sentence, so predictably small, that I didn't even bother responding. Rebecca dropped the key on the coffee table, a quiet metallic clink that sounded louder than any scream, and without another word, she walked out. Derek followed, though he looked back once, not at me, but at the paper still sitting there, its edges curling slightly in the warm air of the room, a piece of truth that now belonged to all of us whether we wanted it or not. I stood for a few seconds longer, letting the silence breathe, letting them stew in the mess I hadn't created, but had merely revealed. Then I reached for my coat, pulled it on slowly, and looked at the two people who had shaped so much of my life through omission, through silence, through the delicate art of loving me just enough not to feel guilty, but never enough to make me feel chosen. I don't need the house, I said simply, as I walked toward the door. I don't even want it. I just wanted to know why I always felt like a guest in it. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't burn anything down. I didn't send follow-up texts or block anyone. I let them live with it. I let them feel the vacuum of the truth settling into all the corners they'd kept hidden for decades. Because the most satisfying revenge isn't the loud kind, it's the kind that lingers. The kind that forces people to sit in the mess of their own making. And maybe, years from now, when the paint starts to chip and the family pictures come down and the rooms grow cold and empty, they'll remember this Christmas, not as the year they handed Rebecca the key, but as the year I handed them the bill for all the years they spent pretending. So tell me, really, was I cruel for doing it on Christmas? Or was that just the first time they were finally paying attention?